Alright, now, this here podcast has been brought to you by Cine.nl. This must you see, you big fecker.
Will you please listen up to what I have to say? Cause we're in for some old-fashioned wrestling today. Not the violent, oily, opposerish kind, but the kind that involves pins and thumbs you will find. Cause it's thumb wrestling time. Yes, it's thumb wrestling time. So we will discuss pros and cons, faults and pluses of all your favorite movies. And we will ponder the merits of cinema in this WrestleMania. Cause it's thumb wrestling time. Yes, it's thumb wrestling time. Yes, it's thumb wrestling time.
Hello, pod people. Wow! That is from The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. You are listening to a brand new episode of Thumb Wrestling, the podcast in which I, Ruud Vos, will be speaking with a certain podcast about a film about which we do not agree. And this here is episode 84, Charing Cross Road, episode Schulmädchen 84, episode 1984, episode Wonder Woman 1984. Wow. And that last one is especially awkward because we're not talking about a DC movie. We're talking about the very first Marvel movie ever made. Howard the Duck, directed by Willard Huyck in 1986. It's the story of Howard, who's just being a regular duck on Duckworld, who just happens to be a former rock star, but he just wants to spend some quality time home alone, when he's being sucked off, chair and all, into a different dimension. One where humans are the dominant species. After he befriends a young musician named Beverly, played by Lea Thomson, and an annoying scientist called Phil, by future Oscar winner Tim Robbins, he learns that the reason he is on Earth is because of a certain ray that was built by Dr. Walter Jennings. Now, he's played by Jeffrey Jones, so he must be a good egg. That is, until they turn on the ray again, and another creature takes hold of Dr. Jennings' body. With the help of Beverly and Phil, Howard goes on to fight this evil, dark overlord. And so, of course, they save the Earth or the universe or all life, something like that, you know. Now, this movie wasn't quite a success, to say the least. But it has its fans. And one of them is Ashley Walker, who lives very far away from the Netherlands, all the way in the state of Washington, in a place called Shelton. Now, Ashley used to work as a film critic, and they want to get back in the game, so this is sort of a dry run for them. And I hope it rekindled something, because I had a very good time talking to Ashley. They know a fuckload about Howard the Duck, and I'm sure that after listening to this, you will know a little bit more too. Now, we talked on Skype on October 24th last year, and you know what, let's just get into it. My conversation with Ashley Walker about Howard the Duck. Just after this.
Show me the money.
Hey, do you like this podcast? Well, this podcast likes you too. Just for listening to it. Even if you're a casual listener. But if you like to be liked, you can be liked even more by donating a small monthly sum of money to us on Patreon. And if you do, you get rewards to show you how much we like you. What am I saying? How much we love you. So visit patreon.com/duimpjeworstelen and get even more warm feelings. And even if you don't, no worries. Thank you simply for listening.
3, 2, 1, fight!
Wow, yeah, this has turned into a surprisingly fun little project.
You say little, but it sounds like you really did a lot, even though it wasn't all connected to the project to begin with, but still.
Well, no, it really wasn't. But I realized, what happened was we sat down and we watched Doctor Strange. I mean, one of those things that we'll occasionally do is kind of pick one of the streaming things, just any of them, and kind of click through and see what looks interesting. And for whatever reason, one night it was, okay, let's watch Doctor Strange. And we both really kind of liked that. I mean, even though, I immediately was like, wait a minute, why is the old one a middle-aged white lady? What's going on with this?
Yeah.
But, so I immediately saw that, there might be a problem or two with it. But, discounting all of that and ignoring all of that, it was still a fun time.
And it looks great. I think they at least try very hard to make the visuals work very well.
Well, right. And I think that is something that is true just simply across the board with the entire series.
Yeah, but I do get the criticism that people have become bored basically with the big CGI spectacles. And with, I would say that Doctor Strange, they managed to make the big CGI spectacle the main thing in a way.
Oh, yes.
If you wouldn't have CGI, you wouldn't be able to make those visuals. So they really try very hard to make a big show out of that. And I would say they succeeded.
Well, right, and that's actually kind of, that's where I suddenly started going with all of this.
But so now you've went through basically the whole MCU catalog up till Endgame, right?
Endgame was last night, yeah, we finally got to Endgame.
What would you say is your favorite?
Gosh, honestly, of all of them, I would probably still have to say Doctor Strange. That one really almost had just the perfect balance, I thought, of actually having a strongish plot line and, characters that you can keep up with. And it was a good standalone feature, just all on its own.
And I liked the resolution in that one as well, where it was a battle of wits more.
Yes.
Let's just get into the movie itself, because we've been talking for quite some time already.
Around it. Isn't that just the way with Howard the Duck? It's no one deals with the movie itself. It's all about everything around the movie, and it's one of those that the film itself has kind of reached this point where it's bigger than itself at this point. It's no longer a movie. It's this legend. It's become. How many of the stories about Howard the Duck are true? How many of them are false? It's the reality of the situation, the truth of the matter doesn't really matter anymore. It's
just so much entertaining stuff to learn about it that.
Right.
That precedes any real truth, if that even exists.
It's what can you get people to believe that is that matters. And even it just came out on 4K disc like a couple of months ago.
Oh, wow.
And even now, even for that release, there are new stories that no one has ever heard before about Howard the Duck. Somehow this disaster of all disasters, it's still clickbait. And and
you mean like with the Robin Williams story?
Right.
That came out pretty recent, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah, and it's and I don't know. I had not personally heard that before.
No, that he'd worked for a week on the film and then he just couldn't get work.
Right.
It wasn't his style of working. He has an improvisational style, and then he had to lip sync to the tune of a weirdly timed duck, and he just couldn't get into it.
Well, yeah, the quote that I saw was, "No, I can't do this." And the thing that immediately struck me about that particular quote was his character from Dead Again walking around the grocery store kind of go, okay, lady, blow me. It's like, this is Robin Williams, for crying out loud. It's like, yes, he had an improvisational style. I mean, but he also absolutely could follow a script and cash a check, right?
Yeah.
I'm not exactly going citation needed at all, but I'm just saying if Robin Williams wanted to make that work, he could have, I don't doubt. But, it could also be that, hey, maybe Robin Williams saw the writing on the wall of what he was working on, saw it out, and took it. And that I could buy easily.
Yeah, the thing with when you hand it down to his improvisational style, you have the genie from Aladdin in the back of your mind that is from years later that he made work because of that. But of course, then you have the luxury that the vocals were recorded before filming began. But that is also a sort of a legend within movie making, how well that worked for that character, and it made the character, and it was so good. So that is his reputation, but it's a reputation he only garnered years after Howard the Duck. He had a reputation, of course, for a certain bit of improv because of Mork and Mindy, but it's not the same thing. He couldn't have leveraged power with his improv at that time.
Well, and even so, with Mork and Mindy, they worked to rein him in on that set, and they were so angry with him a lot of the time.
When I saw this movie for the first time.
Gracious, when I first saw it, it wasn't a disaster yet.
So what was the first time that you saw it?
Well, I saw it in the theater when it first came out. I was, that was 1986, so I was about 13.
Did it click immediately?
For me, yes. But it did for a very specific reason, because my mother hated it. I grew up in what might be described as a sort of a controlled environment, I think might be the nice way to put that. It's like my mother and I would go to a movie every Tuesday. But it was always very controlled as to what I could see. To this day, my parents are incredibly religious. And so everything that I saw, everything that I was allowed to see was curated very, very carefully. And in Dallas at that time, they had their own rating system.
Yeah.
And they kept that into the 90s. But it was something above the MPAA. G, PG, PG. None of these things were enough. That you had to give your movies to the local rating authority, and then they would further rate it, and they would tell parents, what all was in it. And with Howard the Duck, there was violence and there was language and
duck titties.
Right, but they didn't mention the duck tits. And we went to go see it, and my mother was just incensed that there was nudity in this movie. She actually contacted the ratings board. And because, you could. They're local. Yeah. And complained about the duck boobs in this movie. And, why did you not warn me about the duck boobs? And okay, I mean, it's like this was mid-'80s. I mean, you didn't have Google. Now there are so many resources that if you want to know, what might be objectionable in a movie, you could just Google it and find out. That wasn't the case then.
The thing is, though, that you would find that on something like Mr. Skin, even though this would be more akin to Mr. Feather.
Right. Yeah.
Because there is plumage on there.
There is. Well, and the thing is that is basically what they told her, was that it's like, you do realize that, ducks don't have tits, right? And that wasn't, a real pair of duck tits, right? This. And so she had to kind of, grudgingly accept that maybe fake boobs were okay because, even... it's like she doesn't, she wouldn't demand that, if we were to, visit the Louvre, that, they would need to, like, cover the Venus de Milo for me or something. It's like, exactly. Oh, that's art. So I guess she maybe figured out that, we had, like, maybe the duck boobs were artistic somehow. So naturally, if my parents did not like something, that was... great for me. I mean, I would love it.
You would just go, ooh, let's see this.
But otherwise, for better or worse, it was very of the moment. It was very au courant when it came out. It was... So it had the look, the feel, the sound of the time. That soundtrack was really good. They had Lea Thomson, who...
She sings herself.
She does.
It was really good.
She worked so hard and plays the guitar, still has it supposedly.
Yeah.
And she worked so hard to be this character. It's, I mean, I have... think about the most method. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, Daniel Day-Lewis goes out into the woods and, carves a canoe. But, I mean, she learned how to be a rock star for this movie. And she's not even a method actor that I'm aware of. It's,
I don't think so. No.
Right.
I do know that she has some training as a dancer before she went into acting.
Mm-hmm.
Puny god.
I mean, just look at it. It had everything a tween wanted. Does it make a lick of sense? I don't care. I mean, it's like, hello, I'm 13. It's like, I don't care.
But there are some things that are so random that they stand out a bit.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I think that's a good way to phrase it.
I am a little weird with my reviews. I tend to review just about everything but the movie. I mean, years before I even knew I was autistic, it was always about, making the connections, and movies were always more than what was on the screen. For me.
Yeah. What I've heard you do a lot up until now in the conversation is just really talk about sort of the experience, the feelings, the sensations and stuff like that.
Very much so. It's, I mean, to this day, Howard the Duck is like one of the best times I have ever had in the theater. And that's speaking not only of the first time I saw it.
It's sort of like you have your own private subwoofer or something like that, something that enhances your experience
right
then and there.
Well, but it's also when it came to that 70mm screening here in Seattle. Yeah. That was such an amazing experience. It's like, okay, it's one thing to be a fan of Howard the Duck. It is another thing to find some sort of kinship in that. And it wasn't a midnight screening, but it was a late screening. Especially, there are people all around us. It was a rather well-attended screening, and that shocked me. I figured we'd be the only two people there. And and of those two, I was the only one who wanted to be there. And there were people behind me that were hyping this movie up. It's like, oh no, you're going to love this. This is great. It's amazing. And then as it got a little closer to showtime, the truth started to out just a little bit. It's like, well, it's a little weird. And they were really stretching with the special effects and so on and so forth. And for about the first 15 minutes, there was just this odd thing going on. I'm not sure exactly what was happening, but about 15 minutes in, when you've got Howard and, gosh, her name, Beverly, yeah, are in her apartment for the first time. And, she's in that skimpy little thing, and someone makes a joke, and it's a duck pun about foul language, and that broke whatever tension there was, and from that
Right.
moment on, it's like everybody in that theater was absolutely on the same page. It's like, okay, we've seen what we're looking at, we all know what we're looking at, let's just have fun.
Like there was a big mix of people where half of them were on a certain wavelength, others were on a different one. There was sort of a tension because they weren't feeling the same thing.
Right.
And then that joke just brought them together.
Like a little seismic activity, maybe, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
The plates rub together and achieve stasis. But yeah, it was just so incredible to be in the theater surrounded by like-minded individuals who, really and truly just wanted to have fun. And not only was that an incredible experience, but let me tell you, Howard the Duck in 70mm looks incredible.
I thought it really looked good in the copy I saw now.
It's actually a very surprisingly good-looking movie. And when it comes down to the 70mm print, I imagine the fact that they struck them and then just sat them on a shelf because nobody wanted them probably had something to do with that. But yeah, they would do a 70mm film fest every year, and you can definitely tell the ones that were truly well loved versus the ones that just had not been seen and were therefore still pristine. But yeah, it's like one of the worst ones was actually Star Trek VI. Just such a damaged print, but I'm sure they never made too many of those, and it's Star Trek, so naturally that's going to get requested fairly often. But, I mean, they did Lawrence of Arabia, and, I mean, Howard the Duck blew Lawrence of Arabia out of the water. I mean, it just looked so good. But that's probably the only time you're ever going to hear someone say that Howard the Duck was better than Lawrence of Arabia. Probably.
It's quite a statement.
Just going to guess. Yeah, taken out of context, that could probably get me picketed in some places, I think.
I thought, that sounds like a blurb.
Right, exactly. A pull quote. You're thinking like a marketing major now. It's like, let's put that on the poster. Even the director, Willard Huyck, has said that it's a movie about a duck from outer space. It's not meant to be an existential experience.
Yeah, I thought it was Gloria Katz, the co-writer, who said it.
Oh, did she say that? Yeah, I mean, it's just not...
So.
It's one of those things. You are kind of either into it or you are not. And that's absolutely just fine.
I do think that also that the interesting thing about that statement that you just said by Gloria Katz is sort of diametrically opposite to the guy who thought up Howard the Duck for in the comics.
Oh, right,
Steve Gerber, who also gave the okay to this movie and afterwards maintained that it's quite true to the comic book character.
Yes, it is.
But he has said that actually it was sort of meant as that kind of joke, that pointing out how ridiculous life is, how ridiculous reality is, and make it very much existential.
Well, true. And also, I would argue that they're really kind of poking fun at the entire concept of big budget blockbuster filmmaking too. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, you've got your professor who, like goes and punches Nazis on his day off. And it's like, okay, well, let's make a movie about a duck. And so it does kind of have that, that fuck you quality with the, just with pop culture itself, where it feels like it's trying to make a meta statement about pop culture and what we worship and what we'll buy.
But it is not winking at us like modern Marvel movies are. It is sort of played straight within its own universe.
Right.
Like, we made this as a commentary, but we're not going to go all Deadpool, wink, wink.
Right.
Or also in loads of the Marvel movies like Thor, where they go, oh, this is actually... We know that this is all actually a bit ridiculous, but let's go with it. I don't think audience needed that at that point. Now we feel we may need it, but then that wasn't a thing yet.
Given the state of the special effects at the time, I don't know how much they felt they could really get away with making fun of their own concept there, because If people started making fun of the duck inside the movie, then you've lost it.
And it was already a challenge to make it work in screen because they noticed that you could see through parts of his body, see the workings of that, stuff like that. And it was very hard to get it convincingly in camera. But I would say that in the finished product, it works.
It was amazing how well that went together. And that's actually part of, my whole argument with Howard the Duck is that you really and truly have to look at Howard the Duck the same way as that you might look at one of Ray Harryhausen's movies or something of that nature. You've got to look at the state of the art at the time. Really and truly, nothing like this had been tried up to that point. It wasn't a question of, say, like the 76 King Kong, where this was done by a lot of the exact same methods, but it was done on a much smaller scale. And they were not trying to create a character that could kind of lurk in the shadows and lurk in the background. This wasn't just a character in the movie. This was an actual actor. Yeah. Everyone in this movie had to interact with this as if he was a real person that, they just happened to, call up Central Casting acting for a duck, and, they chose him out of all of the ducks available. That's what they were going for, and it's remarkable that they managed to achieve it.
Even to a point that despite its problems, Steve Gerber even mentioned that he was amazed how weird it was to really interact with one of his creations in reality, that there was a suspension of disbelief that he just could step through. He embraced it.
It's either a leap that you can make or a leap that you cannot make.
I carry 23 great wounds, all got in battle. 75 men have I killed with my own hands in battle. I scatter, I burn my enemies' tents. I take away their flocks and herds. The Turks pay me a golden treasure, yet I am poor, because I am a river to my people.
Truly, just about every major issue that I have heard people have with Howard the Duck has nothing to do with Howard the Duck. And it all comes down to, almost universally, one of two sources. It's either George Lucas or Universal.
What do you mean?
No one wanted to make this movie. Lucas had read Howard the Duck and thought, oh, hey, this might make a fun movie. Yeah. And Universal leapt on it, latched on it, and would not let it go. And he was thinking animated. And no, we're going to do this live action.
It's going to be a summer blockbuster. We needed being a live action movie.
Lucas, true to form, just casually, writing checks that nobody could cash, just goes, oh yeah, sure, we can totally do that. And then calls ILM and tells them, oh yeah, I just totally, committed you to, making a 4-foot, walking, talking, live action duck. And I can just imagine, that phone call where someone's like, yay, okay, boss, and hanging it up going, son of a bitch. Once committed, they actually did it. And that's the shocking thing.
I think it's sort of interesting that there's a bit of legend surrounding that. George Lucas supposedly got the idea right after American Graffiti's production wrapped.
Yes.
And then he would have mentioned it back then to Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz, who co-wrote Graffiti. Mm-hmm. Which is highly improbable because the movie premiered in, I think, July in Locarno. And the first appearance of Howard the Duck in any Marvel comic was in December 1973 in Man-Thing, and he was killed off in the immediate issue after that.
Right.
And then fans complained, and then he got his own comic series.
Right. And This wouldn't be the first time that Lucas has a loose relationship with reality. Again, he's another one of those that just about everything he touches becomes something other than what it is. Do I for a minute think that Star Wars Episode 1 is, oh yeah, that's the first script I ever totally wrote, and that's what I was going to start with, but no, it was just going to cost too much, and it's like, no, I don't believe that. I really don't. No, I don't think you had it all planned out, because I really don't think you would have had a brother and sister kissing in the first movie if you had known that's what was going on, because, ew, gross. I mean, come on. No.
Have you ever seen George Lucas in Love?
Yes, I did. That I'd forgotten all about that until
it's a good punchline.
Yes, that was actually probably one of the better things about Shakespeare in Love. I really.
So basically, it started years later when I think just Willard Huyck and Hugh.
I've heard Hike, but I honestly do not know it. That's one of those very. I will believe whatever, and I've never heard him pronounce his name, so I don't know.
It's a mystery, Hike. And Gloria Kassar, they probably originated it, and then George Lucas maybe mentioned it to Universal, but they jumped at it because they wanted to work with Lucas, because they thought, well, he makes blockbusters.
Right. Well, and so many people just kind of slept on and passed on Star Wars, and they lost that bet, so no one wanted to lose that bet again.
It's also a very interesting convergence of just time path of people involved. Like Hike, he just coming off of Best Defense, like also a major flop. Yeah.
And it's like, the thing is, looking at Best Defense now, my God, that was a bad movie.
Then you have at Universal, you have Sid Sheinberg, who just had made a big mess handling Brazil with Terry Gilliam. Also, that's 1985, so that's also around the same time frame. And then he greenlights. Well, it's probably him who greenlit, but they're not sure. It's either him or Frank Price, but Frank Price in the end lost his job over it.
True, and it's like, and Sheinberg, he is one of the big movie villains of like the mid 80s. Gosh, especially, with Brazil and Terry Gilliam calling him out to this day. But it
makes for good stories.
It really does. Every story needs a villain. It's true.
But it even gets into the legend where there are rumors that there was a fist fight between Sheinberg and Frank Price when they had a test screening over who was the one who greenlit the movie.
I know, right? Well, and that is kind of... that's a part of the fun of Howard the Duck. When you are...
I don't believe it, but it's a good story.
I know. The thing is, it's once again, it's like, what's true, what's not true. It's what do you believe? It's almost religious in that. When it comes to the whole MCU, I'm totally Team Scorsese here. I'm like, it's fine. It's fine. It is. It's fine. A lot of time is spent on talking about Howard the Duck as... oh, well, really, this was the first Marvel movie, and how it obviously does not hold up compared to all of the other movies, but that is putting so much pressure on a movie that had zero pressure from that aspect.
Yeah,
it's exactly. It wasn't trying to be a Marvel movie.
Especially not jumpstart a whole movie universe.
Right.
This would have been if they would have tried to begin the MCU with a movie adaptation of The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl or something like that. You're just not going to do that. But they tried making a movie out of this, and it's a standalone thing, and it's admirable.
Or, even it's like, hey, if they had tried to make Doctor Strange first, I mean, can you imagine that would have worked out?
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
I was going to ask you to get into the politics of Howard the Duck.
Well, I mean, if you want to, there is a certain amount of othering going on in this movie. Especially, there's a lot of, you've got normal people, and then you've got, like, he drops down into this punk world and this... And it's another one of those 80s movies that clearly understands that punk is a thing that absolutely does exist, and that's it.
Yeah.
All of the punks were going to the underground clubs and listening to Thomas Dolby, I'm sure.
Yeah, but so he gets attacked in the punk club, that's true, but he also gets attacked by the normies in the diner. What is it with this movie that it thinks that humans just turn homicidal when they see a 4 feet duck walking and talking? And they immediately want to cook it and stuff like that.
Well, right, and they're attacking the duck, but not the human-looking thing that's literally saying, I am here to destroy the planet, and is just openly talking about that. No, let's kill the duck.
And also Beverly, in her first one-on-one scene with Howard the duck, keeps treating Howard like an animal, which seems a sort of invention of the themes of Get Out, like a certain clumsy, casual liberal racism in there. Like, she's trying to get on to his level, but she also offers him to drink out of a bowl.
True.
She thinks that's what ducks might do.
Well, and that's also, if you think about the other, major alien movie from that time, E.T., same thing. Even from the logic of the movie, it's like there must be some sort of a scientist, clearly an explorer on the planet, like looking at flora and fauna and that sort of thing. Some sort of an exploratory mission, and now they're got him stuffed in with the stuffed animals and, wearing wigs and eating Pez. Or no, that was Reese's Pieces. Pez was a different movie entirely. But that's just a theme when it comes to, it's like when the aliens come down, the first thing we do is infantilize them.
I do think it's sort of developed a bit better in E.T. than it is in Howard the Duck. I don't think Howard the Duck tries it very hard, but it is hard to imagine any ducks being alive on the version of Earth that is in Howard the Duck, because you would think that if people get that intent on cooking any duck they see, then how can they even survive as a species? It's so weird.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't considered that. I really didn't even... until you mentioned it, it never really even occurred to me that was exactly what they were about to do. They were about to cook and eat that duck.
There is no reason for it. It is so interesting. I sort of delight in it, but it also sort of makes me think, what the fuck am I watching right now?
Right. Well, and then the, that whole, how does she, stop the whole thing? He's my boyfriend. And just all of the assumptions that are clearly on display in that scene.
Yeah. And there are more assumptions. This movie just, it takes a lot of things sort of for granted instead of working them out in certain ways. And sometimes it just sort of really contradicts itself. Like, Howard at some point makes a statement where you'd think that on Duck World, if that is Duck World, do we live in human world? Sidestepping that.
I think they actually refer to it as Duck World, yeah.
Yeah. So on Duck World, right, they don't fly, so they probably don't have planes. He says something like, if we were meant to fly, God wouldn't have taken our wings away. So that sort of makes me feel that probably they wouldn't have airplanes on Duck World.
Oh, I'd kind of always assumed the opposite, that they had planes just like we do. And, it's like because, we have planes, and if God had meant for us to fly, he would have given us wings, right? So that the exact phrase, but the opposite being on that world meant that that's why they have planes.
Yeah, okay, that makes more sense, because at some point,
but I could see your take on it too, honestly.
Yeah, because if my take is what's happened there, at some point they are flying, and Howard starts yelling, "Tora, Tora, Tora!"
Right.
The battle cry of Japanese kamikaze plane fighter. So that does
That's
suppose
pretty
that
bad.
they do
Yeah.
have kamikaze on Duck World, and that they maybe also had a Pearl Harbor.
Oh, I genuinely had not made that connection either, but you are absolutely correct. I did clock the Tora, but the whole we're about to cook and eat the duck is just nothing that...
Yeah.
I'd never really even considered it before. It was just a scene. Well, and here was one where, a superhero who probably should be able to fly, but...
Yeah.
Can't, because that's the weird thing for Howard is not being able to fly, because if the duck could fly, that would be rather unremarkable.
Yeah. No, he only has the power of sarcasm.
This is true, and even then it's not nearly what it was in the comics.
No. It's not very biting. If it comes to that, I'm a bit on board with Team Siskel and Ebert, who sort of said that probably Howard the Duck would have worked best if he was sort of like a Groucho Marx type figure. Wisecracking, sort of on the outside looking in.
Right.
And...
Well, and to an extent, yeah, I can see that. But, boy, they really didn't have Groucho's timing with this, and I don't think they could have.
No, probably not, no.
No, I mean, not with that technology. There is so much baggage that this film has that has nothing to do with the film itself. It's all been heaped on it by the fact that it was this huge disaster. And the fact that it was a huge disaster with George Lucas's name on it. By this point... Steven Spielberg had kind of become not only a well-known director, but he was a well-known producer. But most importantly, he had already failed very publicly and very spectacularly.
Yeah, with 1941.
Right. And this has to happen to every major juggernaut director. But it hadn't really happened with Lucas yet at all, either as a director, as a producer, as anything. And also, it was a learning experience for Lucas as well. I think the 1-2 punch between Howard the Duck and Labyrinth that year kind of led him to start even keeping his name off of things.
Yeah.
Because... there was this perception that if Lucas's name was on it, people were going to prejudge it as a George Lucas project before they even saw it. And in both of those cases, neither one of those were Lucas projects really at all. It's just he was part of the reason he signed off of them as being good ideas. And that was about it. But say, for example, Return to Oz. He kept his name off of that entirely as a result, in hopes that it would not influence people, and yet that one, wound up being something of a failure on its own, too.
Yeah. There's also a practice that was done more often back then. For instance, 1980... The Elephant Man, it was brought out by Brooks Film, but Mel Brooks didn't put his name in the credits because it was afraid that people would think, oh, Mel Brooks, that must be a comedy. And the same thing for The Fly in 1986.
Precisely. I just watched The Fly last night, and I was like, wait, what? Brooks Films did this? Really? And then I was reading about it, and it's like, oh, yeah, it's like we didn't want to put Mel Brooks on here because they'd be thinking, oh, it's going to be Blazing Saddles again. Although, I wouldn't mind actually seeing Mel Brooks's version of The Fly. Now that I think about it, that could be an awful lot of fun.
May the force be with you.
Even as a fan, I'm going to say that, maybe it isn't a great film. Really, it isn't. But it's got a certain charm. And for me, it's got a certain kind of a nostalgic thing going on for it, too.
Well, I don't have that, so that does explain maybe also my feelings towards it, which aren't as positive. I had fun watching it, but if I would have walked into it as a blank slate, I probably would have hoped that it would have been more funny It is fun, but I would have liked more jokes. Sometimes it just feels like a sketch without a punchline. Sort of the comedy school of like, isn't it funny if this and this and this happens?
Right.
But then it doesn't really lead to a punch, something that sort of wraps it up. It just goes into the next thing that is also, isn't it funny if?
Right.
It's not on the lower spectrum of that. There are things that feel way worse, just fall flat on the face because they're more intended to be that funny.
Well, the thing is that it really isn't even a comedy, I don't think.
Exactly.
And there's this fundamental disconnect between, I think, what they were even trying to do and then what they wound up actually doing. I think it would have been even more muddled and confused had they actually gotten Robin Williams and actually managed to get him to, match the duck lips or whatever. It really is not one of those powerhouse funny movies. It just isn't. They're jokes.
Yeah. Especially the Dark Overlord makes loads of like the one-liners, some of them which haven't dated well, where you think, well, that probably made sense in the time, and you hear it now and you go, what the hell did he just say? Like, smug inspection.
Right. And, not only that, but I mean, it's some part of me shudders when I see Jeffrey Jones in any context these days.
I sort of made a note that the Dark Overlord still isn't as scary as real Jeffrey Jones.
Right. I know, right? It's, which is just, wow. And he is in so many of these movies, and he is so good in all of them.
Yeah, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, it's not the same without him.
No, and it's just, Amadeus, for crying out loud. Rather big profile movies. It's, Disney World basically dismantled one of their attractions. He was a major character in Alien Encounter. After that, they just dismantled it completely. When it comes down to the actual basic plot line, though, if you've got, Weird Machine sucks a character away from their world, brings them here, and then opens a conduit into another place where even bigger, badder things are going to come down. That's the Avengers. That's the same plot as the Avengers, and yet in the Avengers, they have to destroy half of Manhattan in order to actually fix the problem. Not Howard. Not Howard at all. It just takes one duck, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, basically from that standpoint, totally better than the Avengers. But it requires a lot of work on the part of the audience, and it really expected the audience to understand a lot of things about it without being told. The major issue at the time that it came out was that it wasn't a children's movie.
Even though sometimes it does act like it is one. Sometimes tonally it's sort of all over the place. Especially the way that Phil, the character, Tim Robbins, he also sometimes really acts completely goofy, like he's in a movie for kids,
Right.
It was a purposeful quote from Hudsucker Proxy. But,
for kids.
When he's in the back of the airplane, he just goes from mood to mood to mood, and it's all over the place. He turns homicidal, then he turns into a coward, and then he turns angry. And there's no cohesion in that character at that point.
It's unfocused. It absolutely is unfocused. If you really wanted to be generous, you might call it absurdist.
Yeah.
But that's really only if you want to be generous. And a lot of people really don't. Did they put on a movie called Howard the Duck and give it a chance, or are they watching the legendary disaster Howard the Duck that, has been... It isn't even a punchline anymore. It is just openly a punching bag. And it has been for so long. And like I said, this was 3 weeks before Shanghai Surprise came out. And it's like, I can guarantee you that was a worse experience in the theater that month than Howard the Duck was that entire year. It's like, at the very least, we do still talk about Howard the Duck. Has anybody even heard Shanghai Surprise before I just said it?
I didn't.
Yeah, it's one of those that it's known, it's definitely out there, but I mean, that movie essentially killed Handmade Films. And, Howard the Duck, for all of its faults, didn't kill Universal, and, maybe things would be a little bit better if it had, but, here we are.
If anything, it brought us Pixar.
This is true. This is true. Well, not only that, but it was actually a huge watershed for special effects just in general. Animatronics had been used in film quite a few times up to this point, but never to this extent. There were a few more attempts, but it was really not like this, not like an actor. Just creating
a central character.
Right. It's like that really wasn't tried again until CGI. Yeah. And there's a specific character that I could probably mention, but that really wouldn't help the please be kind to Howard the Duck argument at all. But I mean, realistically, no, it wasn't tried again until Lucas did it with Jar Jar. I mean, realistically.
Yeah.
And, frankly, if it's between Howard the Duck or Jar Jar, who wore it better, I'm going to go with Howard the Duck. I really am.
The design of Howard the Duck. There are two things it sort of reminds me of. It's also because there's this slight uncanny valley stuff going on, because it sort of has human eyes, but a very rigid beak and stuff like that. So you have that sort of thing, but because of the human-like eyes and stuff like that, it sort of started reminding me of the first trailer for the Sonic the Hedgehog movie.
Oh gosh, yeah, no, that's a good design. It really that's a good comparison. It really is, and that was a major departure from the look in the comic book too. Yeah, the way he looks in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies is far more in keeping with what he looked like in the comics.
Exactly.
And I did not know that at the time though. So, to my mind, he always looked like Howard the Duck.
And the second thing that he reminded me of is adult Macaulay Culkin.
Okay, I will have to take your word for that one there. Just because I know I should be able to see I can't. I'm not good with faces like that.
Especially with the big lines underneath the eyes and stuff like that, and certain faces he makes. It just sort of really reminded him of Macaulay Culkin.
Really? I know it does have pretty huge bags under the eyes, and I know Culkin kind of has that sunken thing going on, especially now. If I'm thinking about the right person, I'm pretty sure I am. But yeah, like I say, that design, it wasn't until later, it's like for me, I mean, I hadn't heard of Howard the Duck before I actually went to go see Howard the Duck. I didn't know anything about it. To my mind, it really doesn't seem all that out of place when it comes to the larger MCU. It's absolutely... from a story standpoint, it's rather similar. You've got MacGuffins that everybody's running after. It's big, it's explodey. It doesn't make a lick of sense sometimes, and that's okay. But, if this were to be released today as a part of the MCU... Maybe with a different design, because the actual design of Howard himself it's a little weird. Let go of that design, let go of some of or actually, take some of the exact same situations that they did in the movie, but, obviously, not have quite the same constraints that they had with the technology. I doubt very seriously that it would be considered like one of the top tier MCU movies by any stretch, but I honestly think it would not have nearly as much trouble as a film today as it did as a film in 1986.
No, I think you're right.
They were trying to do something, and they were really, really reaching, and I think it's like one of those slow motion shots where the rope is just almost there and their hands tighten and they miss and just plummet right down into the abyss. But I'm really not of a mind where you really need to punish a film for reaching for the moon and failing to grab it. The whole idea is that you really want films to be ambitious. And yes, it's an ambitious failure, but at least there was ambition there.
It really tried. It was going for it really hard.
And it had one thing this movie isn't is forgettable. And to my mind, realistically, the absolute worst thing you can say about a movie is, it was okay. It's like Scorsese, I mean, people got mad at him for a really good reason. That was a burn, and that was a good burn about the MCU. It's fine. And because it's fine is the worst thing you can possibly say. It's like, to my mind and to my way of thinking, is that, bad is inherently better than bland. A bad movie, it does one of the major things that film needs to do, which is inspire an emotion. If people are, reaching for those keyboards and, banging out, missives about how terrible this movie is, 40 years later, I mean, how long, I don't know, how long has it been since 1986? I have no idea. But, they've been doing this for decades. 35 years. Okay, that's a little bit better. And so it's like they're still on about how bad this is 30 years later. This movie did something right, which is it stuck in your mind, and it clearly lives in a lot of people's heads rent-free.
Yeah, they can't shut up about it.
Right. Well, and I can't, but at the same time, I've taken ownership of that by saying, you know what, I like this. This is good.
Yeah, exactly. You have a complete right to do it. You if someone should talk about it, it's you.
The interesting thing that screening that I saw in Seattle, the programmer of that one had several mysteries of how this movie even got made, and he's up there talking about the mysteries of Howard the Duck, and the questions he was asking, I actually knew the answer to all of them. One of them was like, oh, hey, how did this even wind up in 70 millimeter? I knew the answer to that. The answer is that Lucasfilm literally developed a brand new method to upscale a 35 millimeter movie to 70 millimeter. This wasn't simply something where they took 35 millimeter and blew it up into a 70 millimeter and just struck it to a 70 millimeter print. They actually developed a brand new process where they could take a 35 millimeter print and turn it into a 70 millimeter print without any loss of fidelity. And it was going to revolutionize 70 millimeter screenings. It was going to revitalize 70 millimeter, bring that large format back, and really turn that into a thing again. And then Howard the Duck failed. Yeah. And that process quietly shelved. It was never used again.
Oh, wow.
Even later movies that were struck and released in 70 millimeter, Star Trek VI was a big splashy one. That was one of the last ones, really. Yeah. That one was done using the same 70 millimeter process as Top Gun, which used a regular 35 millimeter strip turned. I think that was the one. And so it didn't really require any special equipment, and only certain scenes were actually shot in 70 millimeter too, so the rest of it was just a big blow up. But they planned for this to be a great big huge success, and I really hate to use this phrase, but they put all of their eggs into one basket with this, and they dropped it. They dropped that poor basket. But no, I genuinely don't think they had any idea that it could possibly fail. I think they thought they had all of the elements. It was spacey, it was fantastic, it was a little kiddie, it was a little adult, it was George Lucas. It had all of these things going for it. And then very quickly the boom lowered on it.
Improvementazo.
Well, I first thought of an easy fix, which I'm not sure would be the best one, which would be Beverly sort of as the point of view character. It would be even easier to hide certain things.
Right. Well, I mean, that would actually make it a lot easier to accept the special effects, I think.
Exactly.
Because that's a sticking point with a lot of people. And really and truly, if that's your major problem with Howard the Duck, I genuinely cannot help you.
It's also sort of an easy fix for something that I didn't even dislike that much. So I thought of something better, and my real solution, also in the convergence of time paths, people working together, and working relationship at the time that Howard the Duck was made, what I would say is fire William Hike.
Right.
And I would get someone else to helm the project. And I've also already mentioned him before in this podcast. I'm going to say, let Mel Brooks do Howard the Duck.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, one, I do think that he's a master of getting a tone that is consistent throughout the movie. I think he would have made it into a comedy, which would simply appeal to me more.
True.
And he would have made it into a comedy that appeals a very large subset that could be very instrumental for the success of this movie, namely adolescent boys.
Right.
Which were targets for these kinds of movies for a long time anyway, and they still are. You could get a sort of a wisecracking Howard the Duck in there, consistent tone, and maybe bit better developed characters and consistency of story.
Well, and Brooks also had a big history of, telling studios to take a hike. Which is absolutely not what happened with this at all.
No.
I think Hike was really, really, really...
And he had a working relationship with George Lucas almost by this time, because he was in the middle of I think that Spaceballs came out in 1987.
Yes.
So at this time he was already doing the script for Spaceballs, probably. And I do think that George Lucas would have read it.
I'm actually kind of surprised that there was no Howard the Duck reference in Spaceballs, to be perfectly honest. I mean, you would think there would be at least one dig in there.
Maybe, but there are
but...
loads of references to other science fiction property, but they're mostly iconic movies, not the failures. It's not pissing on...
This is true.
Stuff that has failed. It's parody. It's not that kind of a thing. And also, I do think that Mel Brooks would have gotten like a taste of satire in Howard the Duck that didn't make the translation in this version.
Right. Basically, the script is just so unfocused. You can just see how many people took a stab at, and each person clearly had their own agenda when they were trying to put this thing together. But no, I would be totally down with seeing a Mel Brooks version of this.
Even more than Mel Brooks' The Fly?
I don't know. I would still really, really like to see that too.
Yeah.
And a lot of with Brooks too, he's not really given enough credit just as a filmmaker. Really, as both a producer and a director. I mean, everyone remembers Young Frankenstein and Spaceballs and, Robin Hood, Men in Tights, Blazing Saddles, and I think those are pretty much his most popular films, just right almost in order. But he has done so much more than that.
Oh, yeah. Do you think that the time is right for maybe a Howard the Duck remake?
That is the only reason, the absolute only reason why I went to go see Guardians of the Galaxy in the theater. I probably was not going to go see it, and then people were like calling me. It's like, you realize that Howard the Duck is in this, right? But no, I absolutely think that it's time to bring Howard back. As a matter of fact, Lea Thomson has been very open about wanting to make her own Howard the Duck movie. And go for it. All along it has been said that releasing Howard the Duck in 1986 was a terrible miscalculation. And I have always agreed with that. I just think I have disagreed with the basic assumption that the puppet was just too much to deal with. That, you know, if it had been, 5 years or 10 years down the road and that technology had been, perfected that much more, that would have helped. But I think there were a lot of underlying issues with this particular production that really, really needed to be dealt with before you can even start talking about whether or not the duck looked good enough.
Have you picked 3 movies to recommend?
I have, and boy, did this actually cause me just an awful lot of anxiety. But
Tip 1!
Another one of my big deals is silent film. I've just been, and so a 1915 film called The Dream Lady. A woman inherits a fortune and goes to live in a cabin in the woods where she is going to start granting wishes. And one of the wishes that she actually grants in 1915 is a woman who comes to her wanting to be a man. So it is...
Really?
Yes. And it's actually, it's a very, very sweet, very low-key movie that is just, super easy to watch. It's about an hour, which is a very good length for a film about that time.
Tip 2!
And another one I just watched, a Georges Franju film called Spotlight on a Murderer.
Never heard of it?
Few people have, apparently. On Letterboxd, it has less than 1,000 logs. And I can't imagine why. The print that I saw had a trailer attached to it. And, my bad, French translation was like, is it a fantasy? Is it a thriller? Is it a comedy? Is it a mystery? And, in the first few minutes, a man is tottering around a castle, wanders into a secret room and dies. And in the next scene, it's all
Sounds scintillating.
Right, well, it's all of his family are gathered together for the reading of his will. But since no one can find the body, they can't declare him dead. And so it's what these people are now forced to do when they were expecting to cash in on all of this guy's riches. But now they can't for at least 5 years. It both absolutely is a film by the man who made Eyes Without a Face, and it absolutely is not, too. So it's a lot of fun.
Tip 3!
And then finally, another first watch this year for me, Voyage of the Rock Aliens, which is from the same era as Howard the Duck. Never seen it before. It's basically a long-form music video about aliens who come to Earth to find our greatest resource, which is rock and roll. And it's Pia Zadora's other movie. So, again, it's nothing good. It's just pure fun is all in the world that it is.
It sounds delightful.
It's definitely a lot of fun. And very, very, very popular in Germany for some reason. I'm not sure what that is. But yeah, I had never even heard of it before this year. But no, it's basically, these are some of my favorite first watches from this year.
Germany. They like David Hasselhoff.
David Hasselhoff, and it's Kraftwerk too, I guess.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, of course.
All right. These three sound great. I haven't heard of any three of them, but I will definitely look them up.
All right.
Did you have fun?
Yes, I did.
And so we fought and we battled as we beat each other up. Both of us tried hard and we both failed. Yes, I had you by the thumbs, but neither of us won. Only the love for cinema prevailed.
And that, as they say, is that. All right. Thank you, listener, so much for doing what you're good at, listening. And thanks also to Ashley Walker, who took the time, and it was quite a lot of time, we talked for 2.5 hours, to talk to me about Howard the Duck. I had to cut out a lot of material, which will make for a very good bonus episode this time if you're a patron. And then there's one more person to thank, and that's Theodore Steen, my podcast Pimp Daddy, who connected me to Ashley. He's connected me to some other guests in the past, and it's never been a disappointment. Thanks again, Theodore. Alright, are there any films that I watched these last 2 weeks that I can recommend to you? Well, yeah. For one thing, I watched the new Disney movie Encanto, and I was very much tickled by that one. Especially by the voice work of Stephanie Beatrice, who was the lead character. She really ties the whole story together. It's really good. And then there's this classic from 1976, which didn't look very good to me when I started it, but it turned out to be actually quite special. The Bad News Bears, with Walter Matthau in the lead. He plays a misanthropic ex-professional baseball player who takes on the coaching of a team of Little League baseballers. A team that's really bad. Is there stuff in there that hasn't aged that well? Yeah. But in the whole, it has an ending that's completely earned, more than if what you would expect would have happened. It's better than that. So anyway, this was a cinema production presented and edited by me, which is Ruud de 20e Eeuwse Vos, and with lovely jingles by the genius that is Roy Grutters. This podcast has been made with the support of my patrons, Casey the Great, Niels Timmer, Sine Martijn and Martijn van Kolwijk. And if you want to become a patron too, please go to patreon.com/duimpjeworstelen. You can also find us on social media like Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and of course on Letterboxd. And if you want to send us some hate mail, please do so at duimpjeworstelen@gmail.com. Thank you in advance. Alright, that's it. See you again in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, could we have an enormous round of applause, please, for our host, who has once again succeeded in bringing to us a plethora of top-notch, cinematographically themed entertainment. We have had an absolute ball, have we not? Next time on Thumb Wrestling.
Het is niet voor niets dat de meest bekende quote uit deze film, This is Bad Country, in de eerste 2 minuten zit, want weinig mensen schoppen het heel veel verder. Een van de mensen die de film daadwerkelijk af heeft gekeken en met een pretentieuze toon dit een geweldige film noemt, liegt een nog veel groter deel.
This podcast employs a strict only like and subscribe if you really want to policy. Okay, bye.